I earn millions of dollars a year, but even to buy a house for my parents to be scolded by the whole network cold-blooded. Obviously my sister didn't contribute a cent, but she dared to forge signatures to rob the property, just because I said so. I'm a 29-year-old woman working as a software engineer, and this story begins with the quiet unraveling of what I thought was a normal, if slightly dysfunctional, made family dynamic. I grew up in a middle-class suburb just outside of a small city. My parents worked hard to keep things stable. Dad worked maintenance at a school. Mom worked retail. They owned a modest, single-story house with a tiny front lawn they always kept trimmed. Nothing flashy, but they cared about appearances. Neat clothes, polite smiles. No drama outside the front door. Inside was a different story. My older sister Natalie is 31 now. We were never particularly close, even as kids. Natalie had the kind of personality that made her hard to ignore. Loud, persuasive, always ready with a cutting remark. She didn't go to college, she stayed home. Picked up random part-time jobs, but nothing ever stuck. She lived with our parents until recently, well into her late 20s, drifting from job to job, and acting like she was the anchor of the household. I moved out at 18 for college in another state. I covered my tuition with scholarships, worked part-time gigs in bookstores and coffee shops, and never asked my parents for money. I rented small places, used secondhand furniture, and learned to make every dollar count. Even then, when I visited home, Natalie would smirk when I grabbed a plate of food or stayed the night. Nice to see our little mooch still knows where the fridge is, she'd say in front of everyone. If I brought groceries, she'd complain they weren't the right brand. If I gave our parents gifts, she'd roll her eyes and say I was showing off. At dinners, she'd make jabs like, must be nice to have no bills and a degree to wave around, or oh, look who decided to grace us with her presence. Every single time my parents would smile awkwardly and say, she's just joking, don't make it a big deal. They never corrected her, never told her to stop. It wasn't encouragement, but it definitely wasn't protection either. Still, I tried to be present in my own way. I sent money when my dad needed dental work. When my mom had her hours cut, I quietly paid a few bills I never expected, thanks, and usually didn't get any. But I knew they noticed. I also noticed Natalie never chipped in. Not even once. She still lived there rent-free. Never helped with maintenance and barely cleaned up after herself. I only visited a few times a year, and every time felt like walking into a minefield. I'd stay for a few days, help fix whatever I could. Leaking faucets, broken cabinet doors, and head home with a migraine from all the passive digs. Last year things started changing fast. My mom's knee pain got worse. She needed a full replacement. Then came my dad's diagnosis. Early stage dementia. It shook me. I started flying in more often, using up unpaid leave, juggling work calls between their doctor appointments. My dad was forgetting names. My mom couldn't get up the stairs some days there. Their house, the same one they'd clung to for decades, wasn't safe for them anymore. Narrow hallways, slippery tile. No railings. It wasn't built for aging. I brought it up gently. We were sitting in the living room. Just the three of us, I said. I'd been thinking, maybe it was time to look into something more manageable. A single-story place closer to me, near better hospitals where I could help more directly. I'd take care of everything. I had the savings. They wouldn't need to lift a finger. My mom looked tired. She didn't say no. And she asked questions: what it would look like, where, how far from her favorite grocery store. My dad didn't say much, but he nodded. That was enough for me. Natalie, however, exploded when she found out. She barged into the kitchen while I was making tea, slammed a mug down, and shouted that I was trying to steal the house out from under them. She accused me of forcing them to leave everything behind, just because I had more money now. She claimed I was jealous, that she had been the one to stay and help all these years. I asked what she meant by help. She hadn't taken Dad to a single doctor's appointment. She didn't cook, clean, or contribute. She stayed in that house like it was owed to her, and expected applause for existing. The next day, I found a handwritten list Natalie had slipped under my door. She wanted half of whatever came from the sale of the house, monthly allowances for her time spent caring, an equal say in anything involving our parents moving forward. I folded it up, tucked it into my bag, and flew home. But I didn't forget it. I'd already started making calls, scouting houses, and preparing for what I knew would be a long, exhausting fight, because this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about safety. It was about control. And I wasn't going to let Natalie gamble with either. The day after Natalie's outburst, I waited until things had calmed down before sitting my parents down in the living room. My dad was watching an old Western rerun with the volume too high, and my mom had just finished sorting pills into a weekly tray. I turned the TV down, sat across from them, and walked through everything. The roof leak, the uneven stairs, the peeling kitchen tiles, the power bill that had doubled from all the old appliances breaking down. I explained that they couldn't keep living in a house that was slowly turning against them. My dad had forgotten to turn off the stove twice in 1 week. My mom could barely climb the stairs to her own bedroom. They nodded quietly. My mom rubbed her knee and said the pain made it hard to sleep. My dad blinked slowly and said he missed the big trees in the backyard, but didn't protest. I showed them a folder I'd brought with photos of potential homes, one-story layouts, walk-in showers, wheelchair access houses close to my place, and a good hospital. I told them I'd pay for everything. They wouldn't owe me a cent. I'd even cover movers and a part-time nurse for check-ins. I wanted them safe, close, and cared for. Natalie wasn't supposed to be home during that conversation, but she walked in halfway through and started laughing. Before I'd even finished, she stood in the hallway with her arms crossed, said I was trying to throw them away and take over. When I didn't answer, she walked straight over to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and asked loudly, Who I thought I was to make these decisions without her. She marched back into the room talking over me. She said that, since she'd sacrificed her life to stay home and look after them, she should be on the deed too. She made it sound like she had spent years doing hospice care, when in reality, she hadn't taken either of them to a single appointment. She never even learned how to refill their prescriptions. She just existed in the house acting like her presence was a gift. I asked her directly what she thought she'd sacrificed. She didn't answer. My mom looked down at the floor, and my dad stared at the blank TV screen. Lost in the noise, Natalie kept talking, now saying I was trying to control them with my fancy job money, and push her out after all her hard work. I reminded her that this wasn't about money or control. It was about safety. I told her she didn't need to be on any deed to keep seeing them, or be part of their lives. But this house, it wasn't safe anymore. She slammed the door to her bedroom hard enough to shake the hallway. Pictures that night, she didn't come down for dinner the next morning. I left before she got up. My mom gave me a long hug and said she'd think about everything. A week later, I got a text from Natalie with a bulleted list of what she called her terms. She wanted half of the current house put in her name. She wanted a monthly allowance for her years of unpaid labor. And she wanted an equal vote in all decisions moving forward, no matter what the decision was. I didn't respond. I called my mom and asked her how they were doing. She said things had been quiet. I brought up the move again, and this time she didn't hesitate. She asked me to keep going to find something safe. My dad wasn't tracking most of the conversation anymore, but when I mentioned a house near a park with benches and shade, he nodded. I told them I'd handle everything. They just needed to say yes. That same day, I hired a real estate agent in my area. We toured 3 houses the first week. I focused on places with wide hallways, lots of natural light, and flat entries with no steps. I made sure there was a pharmacy and a hospital close by. One of the homes had a community garden, and another had a small sunroom perfect for my dad's birdwatching. I flew back home the following weekend to help my parents gather paperwork, medical records, bank info, IDs. Natalie barely looked at me. She was busy organizing boxes in the garage and didn't say a word, while I packed up old files from the hallway closet. The next morning, she left a printed sheet on the kitchen counter. Another list this time. It included a request to review all property decisions. As an equal stakeholder, I put the paper in my suitcase without saying anything. By Monday, I had an offer accepted on a 1-story home 10 minutes from my apartment. No stairs, wide doors, grab bars in the bathroom already installed. I paid in full, no mortgage. I called a moving service, hired a contractor to make a few adjustments, and scheduled a nurse consult for weekly check-ins after the move. Natalie didn't know any of this. My parents were on board. The plan was in motion, and I had no intention of asking Natalie for permission. The new house was moved and ready by the 3rd week of the month. It had wide hallways, no steps at any entrance, a walk-in shower with a bench, and a small private garden just off the back porch. The community center was 2 streets away, and the hospital was under 10 minutes by car. I had ramps installed, lowered the kitchen counters, and added smart lighting to help with my dad's forgetfulness. A local contractor took care of the work while I finalized the purchase. The house was now fully owned. No mortgage, no liens, and the deed was in my name alone. I didn't tell Natalie anything about the deed. I didn't mention the closing date, didn't ask for help, and didn't even bring it up. When I flew back to help my parents sort the old house, I booked a professional moving company, scheduled 2 trips, and rented a storage unit nearby to hold anything they couldn't immediately take with them. When I arrived at the house, I found my mom had already started sorting her closet. My dad was sitting in the dining room going through old photo albums. We went room by room. My mom pointed at things she didn't want anymore. My dad picked 2 of his favorite chairs, and we packed everything around them. I labeled every box clearly. I carried everything downstairs myself. 2 days and Natalie showed up. She walked through the front door like nothing had happened, and froze when she saw the moving boxes in the hallway. Her voice got louder every minute. She demanded to know why no one had informed her about the moving date. She said it was her house too. She followed the movers from room to room, telling them not to touch certain items. She stood in front of a bookshelf and said it was hers. Then she pointed at the family sofa and told the movers to leave it, because she had a legal right to it. One of the movers pulled me aside. I asked him to continue packing only the items my parents had already approved. My mom walked over, tapped the mover on the shoulder, and pointed again at what she wanted taken. That shut it down quickly. Natalie stepped outside and called someone. An hour later, I got a message from an unfamiliar number. It was her lawyer friend. The text said Natalie had equitable rights to the property and warned against removing shared possessions without her consent. I replied once I wrote that all arrangements were made with my parents' full knowledge and permission. I suggested any further concerns be addressed to them directly. The next day was moving day. Natalie didn't help load anything. She sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, blasting music on her phone, and crying loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I kept the movers moving, loaded the final boxes, and helped my mom into the car. My dad looked around the house one last time, then got in next to her. We left before Natalie said a word at the new house. My mom's face lit up the second we pulled into the driveway. She walked through the front door without any help. My dad touched the wall in the hallway and said, "It smelled like wood and sunlight." I gave them a slow tour. Master bedroom with grab bars already installed. Kitchen with labeled drawers. Wide recliners facing the garden. I handed my mom the keys first. Then I gave them the envelope with the official deed. I told them the house was theirs to live in for as long as they wanted. The ownership was mine to keep them protected, but they could treat it as home, not as guests that night. We unpacked their boxes and set up the living room. I hung a few framed photos on the wall. My dad sat in one of his chairs and flipped through a crossword book, while my mom tested every light switch. We made tea and watched a movie with the volume low. Back at the old house, Natalie posted a photo on her profile of the empty hallway. No caption, just a picture of an open front door and a box in the middle of the floor. My cousin sent it to me the next morning asking if everything was okay. I didn't respond, there wasn't anything to explain. I spent the next week arranging medical appointments, setting up pharmacy deliveries, and installing a video doorbell. I transferred their primary care to a nearby clinic and registered both of them for community center access. The nurse I'd hired stopped by and walked us through her weekly visit schedule. Everything was in place. I still hadn't told Natalie where the new house was. I hadn't blocked her number, but I also hadn't answered her last 4 texts. I knew a storm was coming. I just didn't know when. 1 week after settling my parents into their new home, things were running smoothly. My mom had already started attending weekly wellness classes at the community center. My dad had developed a routine with a part-time nurse. Crossword puzzles in the morning, short walks in the evening, medication on time. I was installing a new pantry shelf in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, there was Natalie standing on the porch with a rolling suitcase. No warning, no text. Just there she stepped right in without waiting for a word, called out a cheerful greeting to our parents, and walked into the living room like she had just gotten back from vacation. My mom, who was clearing plates, gave her an uneasy glance. My dad stood up halfway, then sat back down. Natalie kissed my mom on cheek and said she was ready to move in. She asked where her room would be and looked toward the hallway, like she already had a space in mind. I told her this wasn't her home. She turned around, laughed, and asked if I was joking. She said it's mom and dad's house, right? Why wouldn't I live here? I reminded her the house was purchased solely under my name. It wasn't inherited, it wasn't passed down. It was a new house bought outright with my savings, intended for our parents to live safely and comfortably. Natalie dismissed it instantly, saying none of that mattered in family settings, and accused me of being cold. My mom stayed quiet. My dad walked down the hallway and closed his door behind him. I told her she could have lunch, but that she would need to leave after no discussion. She sat at the table, picked at her food, and asked how much I paid for the place. Then she asked about resale value. Then she made a joke about property taxes. I didn't answer any of it. She brought up how she'd held the family together while I was off, being the favorite with my laptop and paycheck. My mom looked like she wanted to say something, but instead stood up and took a plate to the sink. Natalie started talking about how, when the time came, this house should be sold and the money split. She said she had earned her share and no paperwork could erase that. I told her clearly the house was not an inheritance. It was not going to be sold. It was not part of any estate. It was my property. My parents would live here as long as they wanted, and when the time came it wouldn't be passed to either of us. She didn't take that well. She stood up fast, knocked over her chair, and called me a narcissist in front of both our parents. She grabbed her suitcase, wheeled it to the door, and said I was destroying the family. She slammed the door hard enough that the wall shook the frame. That evening I got another email from her lawyer friend. This time it wasn't casual. It was titled Property Dispute, Familial Contribution Claim. The email claimed Natalie had legal grounds to contest ownership due to her years of domestic support and cohabitation with elderly dependents. I forwarded it straight to my lawyer. My lawyer didn't waste time. He told me to begin the paperwork to place the house in a protective trust with life tenancy rights only for my parents that would legally separate Natalie from any claim, direct or indirect. He also suggested I document everything from the initial purchase agreement to Natalie's uninvited visit, in case a formal no trespass order became necessary. While the documents were being prepared, I installed a camera above the front door and another in the hallway. I informed the nurse about restricted visitors. I didn't tell my parents about the trust or the legal steps. Not yet. I didn't want to add stress. My dad was forgetting more often, and my mom had finally started smiling again during her morning tea. Natalie didn't reach out for a few days, but I noticed her car parked one street over when I left for work one morning. She wasn't in it when I passed, but the license plate matched. I took a photo, sent it to my lawyer, and made a note. The next morning a neighbor stopped by and asked if a young woman driving a silver sedan was part of the household. She had seen her circling the block slowly a few times. I told her no, and she offered to report it if it happened again. The trust paperwork was finalized 3 days later. My parents were officially life tenants. The trust would dissolve into a foundation upon their passing, one that supported elder care access for underfunded families. The house was safe. The deed was no longer in my hands directly. It was under the foundation with my name on the trustee's manager. Natalie didn't know any of this yet, and I wasn't going to be the one to tell her. The fallout from Natalie's last visit didn't stay behind the front door. Within days, she started posting photos of our childhood home online. The captions were dramatic. Things like, "This house was full of laughter until greed stepped in, and I gave everything for family." Guess I wasn't enough. She uploaded pictures of our parents' old garden, the living room decorated for past holidays, and the dented mailbox my dad never replaced. She tagged a mix of distant relatives, high school classmates, and mutual acquaintances. Messages started trickling in. A second cousin messaged asking why Natalie had been cut out. A woman from my mom's old church group sent a long paragraph about how family should come before property. Someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years asked if I really forced my parents out of their own home. I didn't get into fights. I responded calmly and privately. I said my parents made the decision together. and I supported them financially and logistically. I didn't mention the deed, the trust, or Natalie's demands. I didn't forward screenshots or justify anything beyond the facts. Most people stopped replying after that. Then my aunt on my mother's side called. She had seen the post too. She offered to step in, publicly clarify the real story, and shut down the false narrative. I thanked her and said no. The last thing I needed was another spark. My dad's memory was slipping more each week, and my mom was finally starting to settle in. I didn't want their lives touched by internet drama. A few days later, my mom told me Natalie had called her from a different number. She had asked if she'd be willing to write a letter, clarifying ownership intent, to help Natalie make a legal case for shared property. My mom said no. Natalie then told her she wasn't giving up, that she'd fight until her name was on that deed. I didn't respond to Natalie, but I made the next legal move. I finalized the house's trust, officially listing both of my parents as life tenants, protected in writing. They had every right to stay in the home until their final days. Afterward, it would be transferred directly to a foundation that supported elder, housing, and care programs. The structure bypassed probate, skipped inheritance disputes, and named no family members. Especially not Natalie. I didn't tell her any of this. I figured the silence would get louder with every unanswered question, and I was right. A week later, she showed up again this time. She wasn't alone. A small camera crew stood on the curb. 2 people held handheld mics. One had a DSLR on a stabilizer. They didn't knock first. They just started filming her walking toward the house. She had makeup on and was already crying before she reached the steps. I opened the door, looked at the crew, then looked at her. I didn't say a word. I closed the door again and turned off the porch light. My dad was asleep in the recliner, and I wasn't about to let flashing cameras and strangers ruin one of his rare, peaceful afternoons. 10 hours later, the video went online. It was heavily edited. Black and white filters, slow piano music, subtitles. Natalie stood outside the house with her hands in her coat pockets. The title read, "Local woman shut out by her own sister after sacrificing everything for family." She cried in the video. She said, "I just want to see my parents. I don't even care about the house anymore." The video was sent to me by 4 different people. Before noon, I contacted the platform's legal contact and submitted a takedown request, citing misrepresentation, privacy violations, and targeting vulnerable individuals. I included the footage of her arrival captured by the doorbell cam, and a signed statement from both my parents that no consent had been given to record or publish footage involving them. The video was pulled within 24 hours. That night, Natalie sent me a single text. "You might have money, but I have time." I didn't respond. I saved the message, added it to the folder my lawyer was compiling, and enabled alerts on the exterior cameras. The next day, I received a delivery confirmation from a local print shop. Natalie had printed a dozen posters featuring old photos of our family and left them at the doors of some of our extended relatives. The posters claimed I had cut her off from the only family she ever had and stripped her of her life's purpose. I got a call from my mom's cousin asking if it was true. I didn't explain. I told her only that our parents were safe, cared for, and not interested in being part of any campaign. The next evening, my mom told me Natalie had left a voicemail on the landline, saying she would go public again unless she's put on the title by the end of the month. I didn't reply. I sent the voicemail to my lawyer and made sure the trust paperwork was securely backed up. I scheduled a private home visit from a therapist specializing in elder transitions. My mom agreed to talk. My dad didn't say much, but he nodded when asked if he felt safe. That was all I needed to hear. About a week after the video takedown, I got a message from a woman I didn't recognize. She introduced herself as a former co-worker of Natalie's from one of her short-lived receptionist jobs. She said she didn't want to get involved, but felt I should know that Natalie had been using the new house in her conversations with people, telling them it was partially hers and that she'd soon be getting an inheritance advance. I asked what she meant. She sent over screenshots of texts between her and Natalie. In one, Natalie said she was working on a deal to unlock equity from the house and would have money soon. There was also a voice note. In it, Natalie claimed that the house was technically hers because she'd lived with our parents the longest, and that I had only put my name on it for legal reasons. She said she could prove her right to it if it came to that. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. His immediate advice was to file a preemptive affidavit with the county clarifying sole ownership and affirming that the house had 0 encumbrances or outside claims. We began the paperwork that same day. While filing, something else came up. The clerk, who was entering our documents, paused and flagged an internal record. A previous attempt had been made to record a contract involving the same address. It had been submitted a week earlier. The document was incomplete and never processed, but it had Natalie's name on it and referenced a transfer of interest based on family cohabitation. It even had what looked like a fake digital signature from my mom. The clerk didn't process it because of multiple inconsistencies, wrong formatting, missing identification, and mismatched legal language. But now it was in the system as a documented attempt. My lawyer requested copies and marked the incident for future reference in case this went to court. I didn't want my parents caught in the middle, so I arranged for them to spend a weekend at a wellness resort. Just outside the city, they had massage sessions, daily check-ins, meals delivered to their room, and access to quiet walking paths. While they were gone, I had a full security system installed at the house. Motion detectors, indoor and outdoor cameras, remote viewing access, and a log of all entries and exits. I replaced the front and back locks with biometric scanners. Only my fingerprint and the nurses were added. I also updated all emergency contacts with local hospitals and clinics, removing Natalie's name completely from every file and replacing it with mine. I made sure the nurse on duty understood that no unapproved visitors were to be let inside, no matter who they claimed to be. 2 days after my parents returned, my dad wandered off briefly during one of his unsupervised backyard walks. He'd done it before in their old neighborhood, so we had already been planning for it. But this time, it happened during the half-hour window before his nurse arrived. A neighbor spotted him walking toward the nearby grocery store and walked him back. That part was fine. What wasn't fine was Natalie, waiting for him at the entrance to that same store. She must have been following the routine or parked nearby on purpose. She snapped pictures of him without his knowledge, then posted them on her social media profile with a caption that said, "This is what neglect looks like. They locked me out, and now my dad wanders around, confused and alone." I reported the post immediately and sent the platform my father signed privacy rights statement from the healthcare facility. The post was removed within hours for violating privacy rules. A friend of the family who had seen the post before it went down messaged Natalie privately and told her to stop. Natalie responded by accusing me of turning everyone against her and said she was the only one who really cared that night. My mom sat me down after dinner and told me something she had been keeping to herself. A few days earlier, Natalie had visited while I was out and asked her to sign a letter, something that said my parents had always intended for the house to belong to both daughters equally. The letter was already typed out. My mom said she refused to sign it. Natalie offered to just use her name, as she didn't want to deal with the stress. My mom still said, no, she didn't tell me sooner, because she thought it might make things worse. That was the final push. I called my lawyer, and we filed for a no-contact restraining order. First thing the next morning, the filing included the forged document attempt, the property claim submission, the social media defamation, and the elder manipulation incident. My lawyer also began drafting a cease and desist letter that would bar Natalie from using my name or my parents' likeness in any future media or legal threats. Security was in place, paperwork was filed, and if Natalie wanted to keep pushing, I was ready for court. The restraining order was granted after a short court hearing. Natalie didn't show up in person, but her lawyer appeared with a handful of arguments that didn't stick. The judge reviewed the documentation, the voice messages, the property interference, and the harassment claims, and signed off on the no-contact order for a full year. The court cited a clear pattern of emotional disruption and manipulation of elderly dependents. By the time I left the courthouse, the paperwork was already being scanned into the system. I forwarded the signed order to the security company, the local hospital, and the wellness center that handled my parents' activities. The nurse received a copy too. I also installed a perimeter alert system with motion sensors and floodlights. It wasn't about Natalie anymore. My dad had started wandering outside just after sunrise, confused about where he was. I needed the alerts in case he ever reached the sidewalk before I could get to him. News of the legal order spread fast within the extended family. 2 of my cousins tried calling to talk about healing and suggested we should all sit down and clear the air. I didn't entertain it. There was nothing to clear. Natalie had fake documents, tried to claim ownership of a house she didn't pay for, publicly humiliated our family, and risked my parents' safety more than once. I wasn't going to have a meal over that. Meanwhile, Natalie disappeared from every platform. Her social profiles went dark. The drama from the takedown and restraining order had caught some public attention, and she likely didn't want to deal with the comments anymore. For a while it was quiet. That ended when I received a phone call from a real estate agent who specialized in off-market sales. He asked if I was listing my property on a certain cash sale website. I told him no. He hesitated, and then forwarded me a link to a listing with basic details. 1-level house, senior-friendly upgrades, quiet neighborhood, motivated seller. The contact listed was Natalie, her name, phone number, and then a Gmail address I recognized. I filed a police report within the hour. The listing had no legal documents attached, but it was clear she had tried to pose as the owner. Using made-up contracts, the detective assigned took it seriously, flagged it as attempted property fraud, and launched a formal inquiry. She was questioned at her last known address. Not arrested, but there was now an official record linking her to the attempt. After that, I sat my parents down. We went through their legal rights together. I explained everything in simple terms: the guardianship request, the financial management, and the power of attorney. My mom agreed immediately. My dad didn't understand every detail, but when I asked him if he wanted me to be the one handling things instead of Natalie, he gave a thumbs up and patted my hand. I hired a licensed fiduciary to co-manage their finances, someone fully independent who checks in every quarter. I wanted full transparency, bank accounts, insurance, medical billing, all monitored. I didn't want anyone, especially Natalie, to ever claim I mishandled their funds or made decisions behind their backs. Several months passed with no word from her. Then a letter arrived, handwritten, addressed to my mom. The return address was an old P.O. box from another city. The envelope wasn't marked legal, but I opened it under the terms of the restraining order. It was Natalie's handwriting. The letter wasn't an apology. It was desperation on paper. She wrote that she was living out of her car, unemployed, and felt betrayed by everyone. She said I had destroyed her life over a house that was never hers to begin with, and that she had no one left to turn to. She begged to be allowed back into the family, not to fight for the house, she claimed, but just to visit. I didn't respond. I scanned the letter into the legal folder, added it to the log, and stored the hard copy. My mom cried quietly when I read it to her. I offered to report it as a violation of the no contact terms, but she asked me to let it go. So I did a few weeks before the restraining order was set to expire. I got a call from a new lawyer representing Natalie. He requested a mediation session to discuss restructuring inheritance plans. For fairness, I declined. I followed up with a short letter through my own attorney. There is no inheritance. The house will go to charity. Upon my parents' passing, there is nothing to restructure now. My parents attend weekly activities at the community center. My mom started painting again. My dad joins the memory care group on Tuesdays. He doesn't always remember who I am, but he smiles when I help him put on his shoes. And he remembers that this house, this quiet, warm, peaceful house means safety. The deed hasn't changed. The trust holds strong. There's no drama here, no yelling, no cameras, just two people living their final years in peace. And no matter what Natalie tells the world, no matter how many stories she tries to rewrite, the truth is backed by signed documents, timestamps, hospital records, and full security logs. She can call me selfish all she wants, but facts don't lie.